Late last week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released its monthly jobs report with some really good news. We had added an extra 178,000 jobs in the month before, and unemployment had fallen by a modest 0.1%. But this raised the obvious question of how could that possibly be true? Consumer sentiment has hit its lowest level since the data was first collected, beating out the height of COVID, the global financial crisis, and even the oil shock of the late 70s. The Conference Board survey found that the highest number of consumers ever considered jobs hard to get, and Indeed's data team found that overall, hiring was in an extremely defensive posture amongst the companies they service. Now, perhaps all of these sentiments could be written off as bad vibes amongst people who don't truly appreciate how hot this economy is. Except that, on top of all of this, there is a mountain of data that just straight up contradicts this number. In March alone, when we apparently added 178,000 new jobs, companies announced over 60,000 job cuts, the Fed's internal data showed low hiring, weekly unemployment claims increased to 219,000, and in the exact same report from the BLS themselves, they noted that the labor force had shrunk by 396,000. So just to make things clear, unemployment claims rose, companies cut jobs, and labor force shrunk. And yet the official jobs figure went up. The overall trust in these figures has been waning for some time now as massive revisions become commonplace and we swing between massive gains and massive losses every single month. Even here on this channel, I've spent more time than I would like to admit methodically reverse engineering the statistical technicalities that these government departments use to produce their numbers, because, well, it's really important to our everyday lives. But in this case, just basic arithmetic should prove that something is going wrong here. Either some combination of these numbers are just plain wrong, or they are so unintuitive or unreliable that they may as well be disregarded entirely.
Breaking numbers right now. Economists had forecasted 65,000 jobs added.
Major rebound for American workers after shedding more than 130,000 jobs in February.
A blowout jobs number. How much momentum is in this economy?
Intel, with its research and development hub in Hillsboro, is laying off workers yet again.
Right now, federal workers are bracing for potential mass layoffs as we enter day 3 of a government shutdown.
Trump administration's beginning mass layoffs.
The economy added 172,000 new private sector jobs to kick off the year.
The United States added 172,000 jobs in the private sector.
Okay, so when you read a headline or listen to a politician talking about all of the jobs they have just created, the number they are talking about is almost always the Bureau of Labor Statistics' total non-farm payroll count. It is the number that moves bond yields the morning it gets released, the number that sets the tone for Federal Reserve meetings, and the number that politicians on both sides of the aisle will use to claim that the economy is either roaring or collapsing depending on what suits them that week. The problem is that more and more over time, it has slowly stopped describing the thing most people actually mean when they hear the word jobs. When the BLS says 178,000 jobs were added, most people hear 178 previously unemployed Americans waking up to a new paycheck. What it actually means is something much, much more complicated and significantly less reassuring. To understand why these numbers have drifted so far away from what they sound like, you need to look at where they actually come from. The Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't have a magic real-time feed of every paycheck in the United States. Despite what you might assume, in 2026, with the IRS sitting on a real-time withholding database that could, in theory, tell you exactly how many workers got paid in any given week, that's not the data we use. Instead, every single month, the BLS runs two completely separate surveys: the Establishment Survey and the Household Survey. The former surveys individual business sites and offices and gathers data on how many people they have on their payroll, what those people do for work, and where that job site is actually physically located. The latter, as the name might suggest, surveys hundreds of thousands of households to ask them if they lost their job, got a job, remained employed, or unemployed. The results of one of them gets printed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, while the other one gets quietly buried in the back of the same report. Now, logically, in a healthy data ecosystem, the two surveys should be moving in roughly the same direction most of the time, with small disagreements at the margins. That used to be the case. For most of the post-war period, the establishment number and the household number tracked each other reasonably well. When one said the labor market was strong, the other almost always agreed. However, over the last decade, that relationship has visibly broken down. Economists at the San Francisco Fed have published research showing that the gap between the two surveys has widened to its largest level since they started keeping records, and the divergence has accelerated specifically in the period after 2020. In plain English, the two numbers that are supposed to be measuring the same thing are increasingly telling us two completely different stories about the American labor market, and the one we have decided to focus on is the one that, structurally, is set up to look better than reality almost every single month. Again, just last month, the payroll survey said we gained 178,000 new jobs, while the back of the report, households claimed to have lost 64,000, which really just shouldn't be possible. Now you might be thinking, this is the kind of thing the BLS would be quietly working to fix in the background. And to their credit, in their own technical notes, they actually admit a lot of these problems. They publish the household number, they publish the revisions, they publish footnotes on methodology, and they publish their own confidence intervals. The catch is that nobody who isn't paid to do this for a living ever reads any of that. Markets react to the headline, politicians react to the headline, business owners deciding whether to hire react to the headline, workers deciding whether their job is safe react to the headline. And the headline keeps coming from the survey that has the worst structural fit for what the modern American economy actually looks like. Which raises the obvious question. How has this number become so divorced from reality? And why do we even pay attention to it anymore? Well, it's time to learn how money works to find out what the monthly jobs report is actually measuring, why it keeps contradicting itself by hundreds of thousands of workers in the exact same report, and why nobody actually wants to fix it. Every week, there's another massive data breach, another AI model scraping personal data, or another company rewriting who owns yours. If that makes you uneasy, you're not alone. And that's why this video is sponsored by Proton. Proton is an end-to-end encrypted platform built by CERN scientists who wanted a more private internet. Over 100 million people use it now, and the free plan gets you Proton Mail for secure email and Proton Drive for encrypted cloud storage in one account. What I actually like is how easy it makes privacy. Your emails are encrypted so only you and the recipient can read them. Your files are encrypted before they leave your device, and because Proton is based in Switzerland, your data is covered by some of the strongest privacy laws in the world. You can even create email aliases to cut down on spam and phishing. And Proton Drive works like any other cloud storage, just without anyone, not even Proton, seeing your stuff. If you want to take control of your digital life, you can get Proton Mail and Proton Drive together for free. Check out the link in my description to get started. Okay, so it is easy, and honestly a little bit understandable, to look at these consistently inaccurate economic metrics and conclude that the agencies putting them together are just trying to make the politicians they answer to look good. However, at the very least, before we attribute this all to malice, we should understand how it is much more likely to just be statistical stupidity. And to that end, there are really three big problems with how we come up with this number. And the first simple problem is that payrolls are not people. The Establishment Survey does exactly what the name suggests. It surveys establishments and asks them how many payrolls they processed that month. At the time this data source was first conducted, it was a perfectly reasonable proxy for how many people have jobs. One person, one employer, one payroll. This is still the norm for most employees, but it's getting less and less normal every year. These days, a single person can be attached to multiple payrolls, and the number going up doesn't necessarily mean a new person got a new job. It might just mean an existing worker picked up a second one to keep up with rent. The most extreme version of this shows up in healthcare, where it's pretty commonplace for doctors and nurses to work across multiple different establishments. A single doctor working at a hospital, a private practice, and doing some research on the side could technically add 3 payrolls to the official number, while only being one single working person. This technicality was particularly important for last month's job numbers because it also counted 35,000 healthcare professionals returning to work after having been on strike the month before. Hopefully, it should go without saying that this isn't the same thing as the economy genuinely providing employment opportunities to 35,000 new people. But all this data does is look at payrolls every month. So the Establishment Survey says we added 178,000 payrolls. The Household Survey in the same report on the same day says 64,000 fewer humans actually have work. Both of these numbers are technically true. They are just measuring different things, and almost nobody outside of macro nerds ever bothers to look at the second one. Which brings us to problem number 2, the methodology. Collecting payroll data at the scale of the entire American economy is genuinely impossible, and the model the BLS uses to do it is becoming increasingly outdated. Payrolls are not counted firm to firm, but rather location to location. Again, the establishment in the establishment survey means a survey of individual, well, establishments. So as more and more people move into jobs that are work from home, jobs that move between cities, or jobs that run out of a head office on the other side of the country, it has become much harder to accurately assign those payrolls to a real workplace and monitor them month to month. Double counting, undercounting, and plain old misunderstandings about what payrolls should count have just become far more common as our working arrangements have become less rigid. This is part of the reason why revisions have gotten so embarrassingly large. Last year alone, the BLS quietly revised away 800,000 jobs that they had previously claimed were added, meaning the headline number for an entire chunk of the year was just wrong. You can actually go and look up the exact collection methodology that the BLS uses on their website, and you can see it was designed for a time when most people either went to a factory or an office, did their hours, and went home every day. To try and balance this out, the BLS also uses something called the births and deaths model, which is essentially a statistical estimate of how many businesses they think were created or shut down in any given month, used to fill in the gaps that the survey itself can't capture. The births and deaths model has its own problems, but the biggest one is that it is heavily skewed by the proliferation of gig work, which we have mentioned a few times in previous videos. A new business in this model can be a guy who started driving for Uber last week. That gets counted as a new job creating enterprise, even though it is functionally a person without stable employment trying to make rent. So the survey itself misses the modern workforce, and the model designed to patch the survey is also calibrated for a workforce that doesn't really exist anymore. Now, these growing blind spots in one of the most important metrics in our economy is not great. But it gets worse. The third problem is by far the biggest one, and that is the people the payroll survey doesn't see at all. The establishment survey, by its very nature, tends to count people in traditional payroll jobs, which on average means more secure positions with more established employers who actually respond to voluntary BLS requests. An increasingly large share of the American workforce does not fit any of those descriptions. They are private contractors. And this is not just gig workers. This includes everyone from a guy delivering groceries through DoorDash all the way up to extremely high-end technical roles. Consultants, freelance software engineers, and well, yeah, basically the entire creator economy. Can't forget about the real heroes. These people get counted as employed or unemployed by the household survey, and if they lose their work, it still sucks just as much as anybody else losing their job. But they are completely invisible to payroll. They are also, conveniently, the people most likely to lose their work before anybody else in more secure formal roles. When a company starts to feel a downturn coming, the first line items to get cut are not the staff with employment contracts and severance packages. The first to go are the contractors, the freelancers, the agency the marketing team was using, the consultants, and the, in-office life coaches that teach the CEO how to act human. None of those people show up as layoffs on press releases. None of them show up in the establishment survey. And it can take weeks or months before they show up in unemployment claims, because most of them aren't eligible to file in the first place. This is how the labor force can fall by almost 400,000 people in a single month, while payrolls technically still go up. The two surveys are just capturing two very different groups of workers, and those groups are drifting further apart every year. One group is on a W-2 in an HR system with their payroll processed by a service the BLS already knows how to call. The other is invoicing clients, paying their own taxes, and disappearing from the data the second the contract dries up. Which raises a perfectly reasonable question. If the payroll survey is flawed, why do we still use it? Well, two reasons. The first is that it's fast. It can give us monthly data with comparatively little collection, which matters for an economy where the Fed and the government need to make decisions on a near real-time basis. The second is that the payroll survey is reliable-ishly unreliable. Businesses are not exactly motivated to make up payrolls to boost national statistics, whereas individual households can be coy about their employment situation for all kinds of reasons. People who have a job are less likely to answer the phone for a BLS survey because they are, well, working. People who just lost one might tailor their response out of embarrassment or genuine confusion about what counts as actively looking for work. There is also a less talked about timing problem. The household survey covers the week containing the 12th of the month. So a person who loses their job on the 13th keeps counting as employed for another 4 weeks before the data even has a chance to catch up. So the household survey is not some pristine alternative the BLS is just refusing to use. It has its own real problems. Now, I know this again sounds like boring money man rants about data collection methodologies for 15 minutes straight, but this really does matter for two reasons. The first is that, of course, these numbers get used to make real decisions that affect us. Federal Reserve policy on interest rates, stimulus debates in Congress, how foreign investors price treasury yields, and ironically, it even feeds into a business's own plans to hire. If companies see unemployment rising and headline payrolls falling, they become more risk-averse, which leads to less hiring, which leads to less consumer spending, which leads to even less hiring. So it's just as important to make sure that these numbers don't look artificially pessimistic as it is to make sure they don't look artificially optimistic. The second reason this is so important to understand is that if these numbers keep looking like total nonsense, it becomes easier for people to dismiss them as useless at best or outright propaganda at worst. Not having faith in our economic statistics is a great way to undermine faith in the economy as a whole. Now, the economists at the BLS know all of this. They have written papers about it. Statistics agencies in other developed economies have already started rebalancing. The reason the United States hasn't is structural. Changing the methodology would create a one-time discontinuity in the data series, which makes year-over-year comparisons look weird, which the market hates. It would also require the BLS to admit, on the record, that the number it has been publishing for decades isn't really measuring what people thought it was, which is the kind of admission federal agencies do not love making in front of a Congress that is already gunning to cut their funding. And on top of all of that, every administration in power has a quiet incentive to leave a politically convenient noise generator exactly where it is. A monthly number that can swing 200,000 jobs in either direction based on which doctors happen to be on strike that month is incredibly useful if you are the one writing the press release. So the number stays, the methodology stays, the revisions get larger, and the gap between the headline and the lived experience of the labor market keeps widening. Which means for the foreseeable future, the most quoted economic statistic in the United States is going to keep telling a story that fewer and fewer working people actually recognize. Now, if all of that wasn't enough, go and watch this video next to further understand how to lie with statistics. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.